So welcome to the Nutritious and Delicious podcast. My mission is to support busy parents all over the world to learn time management while taking care of your nutritional, physical, and emotional health. And I am Bethany. I'm the host of Nutritious and Delicious podcast. So after all, a healthy family starts with a healthy parent. And today I'm super excited. I have Tricia here with me today. And Tricia is an anxiety and trauma coach. And she also has advanced EFT practitioner and works with women, including women that actually have been conditioned from birth to be women, to feel calmer, happier, and live the life that they want. She has over 12 years experience actually supporting and mentoring and coaching moms around birth trauma, and has also co-founded a perinatal mental health charity for support. She lives in Scotland, England with her 4 boys, dog, and enjoys to go to the beach for her own mental health. So I'm super excited to have you here today, Tricia.
Thank you so much, Bethany, for inviting me in. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. So today's topic here is going to be all about recovering from birth trauma. And I would love for you to actually be able to share a little bit about your personal story and why you can connect with so many moms here in our community today.
Absolutely, I'd love to. So my own experience was, so we couldn't have any children. So we tried for quite a long time to fall pregnant with our own children, and after 4 years of not able to fall pregnant, we went to IVF and ended up with a set of twins. And a year later, I spontaneously fell pregnant with another child. So I ended up with 3 children under the age of 2, so 22 months apart, which was pretty intense. And that all resulted in what I can only describe as a complete mental health breakdown. So I quite often call it like a nervous breakdown, because that's what it felt like. It felt like my whole body stopped working. And it was a pretty intense experience. So after that happened and I started to recover, I decided that I wanted to work with new mums. I wanted to work with mums who were in the same position as me, mums who were struggling with their mental health. And so I started to work as a sort of postnatal doula, and I was going in and out of people's houses, and I thought I'd be working with a lot of twin mums is what I thought I'd be working with, because my first 2 were twins, and I was really involved in local twins club, and I used to run like groups of twins club, like support groups where we'd like clutch onto each other. But what I was actually working with was trauma.
Yeah.
And the people who were so broken that they wanted to invest in help, were actually people who were severely traumatized by their experience. And I don't think, I felt like my own experience had been quite traumatic, as in going to IVF is traumatic, and my births were fairly traumatic, and my whole sort of postnatal experience was fairly traumatic, because it was just so intense each and every time. So I could really connect with them. I could really see like how, like, they weren't broken, they were reacting to a very, very, very intense experience, and they were really, really, really struggling with the intensity of it, and really struggling with how difficult it was for them. They were really, really finding it hard. So I decided to retrain and really support women who had experienced trauma, and I was working, I was supporting them in their homes, and I started running a charity with one of my friends, Lauren and I set up Perinatal Mental Health. So I have a dog. It's always like a 4 o'clock. And we're 4 o'clock in the UK, and it's always like a 4 o'clock barking session, but she'll stop in a minute. So Lauren and I set up Perinatal Mental Health support, and a lot of the women that were coming there were presenting with anxiety or depression, but actually fundamentally a lot of them had experienced a very significant traumatic experience, either in birth or in that perinatal experience, that perinatal time, such as their breastfeeding experience, such as a colicky baby, such as maybe they'd experienced loss before they'd fallen pregnant. All sorts of things can lead to those trauma symptoms.
There's a lot of trauma around birth in general, being pregnant. I think when you've experienced that before, I know for myself when I had experienced sort of the postnatal, when I was pregnant, before it even happened, I was really anxious, I think, going into baby number 2, and I'm sure you probably felt that way too, because you have 4.
I've got 4, yeah. So I'm excited to go through it all again. So when my youngest started school, what I felt was I wanted to experience it all again with all the information I knew. So basically I decided that I really wanted to have that experience again, but have that experience from a place of knowledge and actually enjoy it. Like, I felt like I never really got a chance to really enjoy my children. Like, I felt I never really got a chance to enjoy them and to be with them and to nurture them and to love them the way that I had really thought that I was going to do it, because it had been so hard. And it was just a completely different experience. Baby number 4, it was a completely different experience, because this time around I did everything completely differently. I rested. Like, I properly rested after I had my baby. I got a postnatal doula, which really supported my mental health. I had access to my own EFT supervisor. I had access to all the people who had supported, who were part of the Perinatal Mental Health charity that I founded, so we had so many different people. So it's a completely different experience. And, and I felt so well. I felt well when I was pregnant. I felt well after I had my baby. I felt like I could ask for help. I didn't feel bad for organising like a postnatal doula, or feel bad for organising like a mother's help. Or, in the UK here, like, we generally wait a year until our kids like start nursery. Which I think is I don't know, what's it like in Canada? When do you go back to work?
It's typically a year here. For most people that are obviously being self-employed is a completely different story. But if you are kind of working for a company, typically it's a year and they expect you to be back. And if you take that time off ahead of time, like I did, I took a couple months off before they expect you back earlier, and I wasn't ready for myself either.
So certainly, like, I think in the States, it's like 6 weeks or something like crazy, isn't it? In the States, it's like a much shorter time period. But I didn't feel guilty about like putting my son into nursery, like when like he was 8 months old. Put him in for like just started like half a day a week, and then built it up to more time. And I didn't feel guilty about working and returning to work and all those things. It's a completely different experience. My whole mindset was just different.
It sounded like you had more of a community around you, the fourth baby, and it almost, I think you gave yourself that permission to be able to ask for help. And I know the feeling, because the first time around, I remember when I had my first son, I thought I should do everything myself, and it was a crash and burn situation for me. And then second baby, I hired a doula for the birth, and then also the doula became the postnatal doula and helped me. And it was more because I think I was anxious going into having 2 kids under the age of 2 right off the bat. So I think it's like second, third, fourth time around, you're kind of like, oh, I don't need to be that hard on myself, So what's kind of some things that you could give us, like 3 or 4 things that you could give us that could help clients work through if they have had birth trauma or they are anxious about having baby number 2? Can you give us some tools around that?
Absolutely. So people who experience birth trauma, so like in the UK, we think something between like a third and half of women experience some sort of perinatal trauma.
That's a lot.
And that will be the same right around the world,
Yeah.
And particularly much more like medicalised birthing environments, birth trauma rates will be higher.
Yeah.
So we think they're like reasonably high, but only a small number of them will go on to develop PTSD.
Oh, okay.
But some of the symptoms to be aware of are things like increased anxiety, feeling quite hypervigilant, feeling very angry, like having flashbacks, living the experience again and again and again, isolating yourself from your friends or isolating yourself from other people who are pregnant or have just given birth. So there are some of the things to be aware of. So I think that's quite helpful to know what to be looking out for, whether that's something that's going to impact you. Because a lot of people will have a difficult experience, but their brain will be able to heal it themselves. So not everybody who's had a difficult experience will need help. But I think the first thing to really think about is really the thing with trauma is often it's unprocessed, so it sits in the brain and it can be very hard to understand like where it starts or where it stops. It can be really hard to understand that at some point actually you felt okay after it happened. So those bookends to the trauma are really important. Those bookends to that experience are really important. So when it started and when it stopped. Because sometimes what happens when you've experienced trauma is the brain doesn't recognise that it's finished and that it's over, and it can stop protecting you. So
that's huge. Actually, that's big, because I do understand that process of you still feel like you're in a state of, it's not even you, it's like you've said before, like your body's sort of trying to keep you in a state of, it still fears that something could happen. So like unknowingly you may do something, like you just said, like you may like avoid someone who's pregnant or something like that, like if you're in public and you're not consciously sort of doing that. And if it's sort of around birth trauma, and I could imagine also a lot of women that experience loss of a baby, or having to go through IVF and things like that, like I could imagine being around people that are happy too are really tough.
Very, 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 very tough. So, and then actually what often happens is women will then find communities, people that are safe, because you kind of want to be with other women who get it. And actually that then perpetuates the issue, because then what happens is you're constantly triggering each other, and nobody's really getting any sort of process or any support to actually heal themselves. So actually what happens is you clutch to safety, don't you? You clutch to safety. So there's somebody over there who's had a traumatic birth, therefore you will clutch onto them as a safety mechanism, but actually that will then help to keep you stuck in that trauma. So things that can be really helpful are actually getting a space to actually share your story. So having somebody who can listen to you, but really listen like without judgment, and really listen without advice, and really listen without getting involved, without saying anything, just actually really listening and really honouring your feelings, and really, really validating your feelings. And so that you can get a really clear sense that it started, there was a middle, and that there was an end point. That's really helpful when you're trying to process trauma. Started, there was a middle, and there was an end point. So having somebody to really listen without telling you about their friend round the corner's neighbour's daughter who also happened to, because that's what happens, isn't it? We when somebody tells you your story, you're so keen to connect with them, so therefore you sit there but you listen to respond, to share, and sharing can be really helpful. But actually with trauma, what you really need is somebody just to listen and get that story very, very, very clear, start, middle, end, and this was the experience, without any interruption. So I think that can be a really helpful tool.
It's almost like a safe space for them to be able to sort of process it, because I can see where when you have trauma, like you don't want advice from other people. You don't want people to compare their stories either. But you want a place where you feel like you can openly tell somebody, and basically process it in a safe environment where it's not going to be used against you or held
Absolutely. Yeah,
um, as
absolutely.
judgment, you know?
Yeah, totally. And the sequencing is quite important as part of that somebody actually gets really clear sense of like the sequence of how things happened and being able to like put
Yeah.
together like a story, and then the brain can then file it away because it's like, right, okay, that's the story. So
Mhm.
that can be really helpful. Journaling is like my other tool because of exactly that sort of same thing. So if you don't have somebody who can sit and listen without interruption, without judgment, without sharing another experience, journaling is a really, really, really helpful process.
Mhm.
And you can journal just by writing down everything you feel about it. You can journal and write down the whole story from beginning to end. But you can also do some other really lovely things with journaling. And like letter writing can be a really helpful thing. So
Yeah, I love that.
writing letters to people who are involved, and these letters will never, ever, ever leave your house. You can burn them after you've
Yeah.
written them. But writing letters to the people that were involved in a good way or a bad way doesn't really matter. There's no judgment there. But just writing letters to sort of stakeholders.
I love that. I actually do that myself. Obviously, like birth trauma and things like that. Like, a lot of women that I've talked to, it's more, I think, because of the medical community, how they were treated. That I was going to actually ask something in a second here, but what I was saying about the letters is they're very therapeutic. Like I've done them myself, written letters, and I burn them.
Yeah,
because it's a way of sort of releasing the negative energy or the sadness or something
absolutely.
involved that you've kind of experienced. And again, you don't pass them on to other people or things like that. But what I was going to ask you is during this time right now in the world and women going into the hospital and stuff, because I know in the UK it's more like about midwives and stuff, but have you noticed I want to say like an increase or a different kind of trauma with women going into the hospital now with this whole pandemic going on and things like that? Because now it's kind of taking away from some women's birth plan, I guess, of what they wanted and, masked, not masked, all this kind of stuff. It's kind of put more restrictions on how they, their choices, I guess, their choices in the matter. Have you noticed?
I think it's really impacted the choices, but lots of other things as well. Because it's multi-factored, but birth trauma rates have definitely gone up.
Yeah.
So first of all, what I would say is women themselves are in a really heightened state of anxiety. So
Right.
they are in a really, really, really heightened state of anxiety before they go in. So when you think about animals giving birth, like animals who are very anxious giving birth will have really difficult birth experiences.
Right.
So what's happening is women are going to give birth and are probably they do have heightened anxiety because they're living in this like fear about COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this like fear about like that you're going to catch COVID, and then that means you're going to be isolated in a room.
Oh, okay.
Or like
Taken
if
away.
your partner has COVID. So I've had people whose partners have been tested for COVID and therefore the partners haven't been allowed in. So therefore the first few weeks before they give birth, they're in this like heightened state of like anxiety about catching COVID, about COVID passing to the baby, even though there's very like little to no evidence at all that that's an issue.
Do you find there's more home births because of this, like because of the anxiety and the fear of going into the hospital? Like I know everybody can't have a home birth. If you're obviously the baby has to be completely healthy in the right position, all that stuff for that to happen. But do you find that women are kind of gravitating more to that direction with this
so
happening?
more women are definitely having, I would say
Yeah.
that definitely has happened. But one of the issues that we've had in the UK specifically, I'm not sure about Canada or anywhere else, but one of the issues that we've had in the UK is that they stopped doing home births for quite a long time. So they weren't doing home births because they didn't want to put their staff at risk of going into people's homes. But there was definitely been an increased appetite for people wanting home births. The other issues that we've had is because of the stress that the healthcare workers are under. We've had midwives in the UK leaving and doctors and other medical people leaving the profession So I was working with somebody the other day, and when she was in labour, she was in the antenatal ward, and she was told that that there was currently 9 women in labour, and there was only 4 beds in the labour ward. So can you imagine?
Yeah, can you stand in the hallway? Like,
yeah, can you stand in the hallway? And so she was like, she was getting herself really, really worked up about that. It's really tricky. I've also had situations of people who have when you go in, you have to get a lateral flow test, and so they're waiting the lateral flow test. So it's like so it's like the sort of like the so we have different testing here for COVID. So there's a lateral flow test, which isn't quite as accurate, but it's like a DIY kit to be able to test COVID.
Okay.
I don't know what's called in Canada. There will be something. So we've got like a PCR test.
Oh yeah,
and a lateral flow test.
Mm-hmm.
So the lateral flow test is like a home kit. So so when you go into hospital, you get given like a lateral flow kit, and as a lateral flow test, and as you're waiting for the result, it means you're not allowed to go into the labour ward. So you can be in active labour, but they won't put you into. So I've had all sorts of things, and then the other side of it is I had women who were separated from older siblings or separated from their parents because of COVID right at the start of the pandemic. So birth trauma rates have really, really, really gone up.
There's such a I was gonna say, like, I haven't been obviously in any kind of healthcare system. Like, I used to be a nurse, but I haven't been in any healthcare system, so I haven't seen it for myself. But I was just sort of wondering, like, what the process was more for women now going into hospitals and things like that. And I'm sure, like, there's like, I couldn't imagine waiting around. Like, I went into active labor very fast myself, and I couldn't imagine standing there in pain and someone telling me, like, to take a test or stand in the hallway or anything like that. Like, it would almost make, I think, women panic and give birth in the car or give birth at home, and it's again an unplanned. It's very hard and.
Absolutely. Good. And there's been a number of partners who've missed their babies being born. So a number of women gave birth on their own as well in the pandemic. So so that was really difficult. Either partners were told to be outside in the car, and then by the time they came in, it was too late, or told to go home, and by the time they came in, it was almost too late.
Yeah.
So a lot of things have really happened over the last year. So it's been a really, really, really tricky 18-20 months. It's been a really, really, really tricky time for women giving birth. So, and not allowed doulas, not allowed additional birth partners, because they've had like one birth partner policy. So because I know with my second, I was able to I had 2 midwives because one was in training and watching, and I had 2 doulas because, again, one doula was in training, and my partner. So I had quite a few people in the room, and I couldn't imagine them just saying, like, you need one person, because it's like, do you want someone that's trained in birth or your partner there? Like, and then it's like you have to choose, and then you start to feel like, and people, they want their mama and they want their partner there as well. Like, it's comfort, right? It's comfort, and what you really need is that emotional safety. And when you think about birth trauma, it's often not what's happened to somebody, but it's often how that experience has been lodged, and that experience has been lodged depending on how they have been regulated in that environment, which is why somebody can have quite a traumatic birth. But if they have got an amazing midwife or an amazing doctor or an amazing partner or an amazing mum or an amazing doula who can be there and stand with them and ensure that they know that they're safe and that their baby's safe and that everything's going to be okay regardless of whatever's going on around them.
Well, it's such a vulnerable time for you, right?
That makes such a difference. Whereas if you've had a really difficult experience and you can't escape it because you can't fight or flight, and there's nobody there to regulate you throughout that experience, so there's no emotional holding, that is when you'll experience birth or perinatal trauma, because you need somebody to be with you to regulate you and let you know that you are safe. That's what humans need. We need co-regulation. So we need somebody to let us know that you are safe. Everything's going to be okay.
Well, I even remember that because my second, I didn't have any drugs, nothing. I did it all natural, and I couldn't imagine, like, because you need someone to sort of talk you down when you go into those states, because you kind of already are in a panic state, I would say, anyways, minus all this happening, you know. I couldn't imagine, like, on top of that, having to think about all these other things, you know. So
absolutely.
what's a few more things that you could give to women that can kind of help them through these times?
So I think there's like a lot of things like rest and recovery. Like I think that's really underestimated, and that's really a lot of the work that you do. Like nutrition is really important as part of that. That kind of like recovery is really important. Looking after themselves is really important. I think it is really undervalued, like the importance of rest. But if you've been through a really difficult experience and you're looking after a baby, that is enough. That is enough for you to do. You don't have to do anything else.
You don't need to put your body into like a state of survival right off the bat. And I think there's a massive difference, and you probably noticed this too, from the Western world to the Eastern world, because we're surrounded by a lot more in the Eastern like community, the nourishment of the food, you know, the mothering of the mothers coming in and helping, and you know, giving that mom that rest and that time. And I think in the Western world, like you said, we're sort of kicked out the bed right away, given a brand new baby, expected to sort of fit back into skinny jeans, go to work in 6 weeks, and, you know, live off of, you know, a coffee throughout the day. And it just, it isn't feasible, right?
Absolutely, totally agree with you. So I think really that rest and that recovery is really undervalued, like the importance of that rest, recovery, relaxation. And that is such an important part of recovery. And I'm not talking here about sitting on your phone, zoning out. I'm talking about proper deep rest. So that might mean boundaries and saying you don't want to have visitors. It might mean asking for help, which can feel really uncomfortable. It might be addressing your needs in different ways. Just different things to support that recovery. But rest is really undervalued. But yet, in terms of trauma, it's probably the thing that you need the most. And learning to rest, learning to relax, supporting your nervous system, so deep breathing. All of these things are really important. What you eat, what you drink, you know, how you're nourishing yourself, you know, going out for gentle walks, because the walking is a really important part of recovery. In terms of like the rhythm of walking can really support that recovery from trauma. So there's lots and lots of things that people can do to support their recovery from trauma, just through rest. Really rest with like replenishment. You know, they've been through a lot. So, and just that realization, that recognition, what they've been through. So being compassionate to yourself, you know, and compassion, you know, when you're resting and you're looking after yourself, that is compassion. So that's quite an important part of it. And then obviously thinking about getting professional help, you know, not everybody needs professional help. You don't necessarily need it, but there's lots of different therapies and out there, therapies and interventions out there that can support you. So going to see a counsellor, CBT, EMDR, somatic experiencing, TRE, which I think is tension, I'll get it wrong, tension release exercise, kinesiology, acupuncture. All of these things can help. I offer emotional freedom technique and another intervention called the Rewind, which I find really exceptionally powerful for supporting trauma. But there's lots and lots of different therapies that will support you as part of that recovery. And there's not one right therapy for everybody. Different people will need different therapy and different support and different practitioners. It's really important that you seek somebody out who understands specifically perinatal trauma. I've seen a lot of people who have been to see somebody who doesn't understand birth and doesn't understand birth trauma. So they're possibly a trauma specialist, but they don't understand what's so traumatic about giving birth. So it's important you see somebody who's got a real understanding of birth and birth trauma.
It makes me think, because I've done EMDR myself, and I would imagine that birth trauma itself is a very physical thing, because it's like, again, when you're giving birth, your body's kind of doing what it wants, and you sort of feel like a bit of on the sidelines, to like I felt like I was a science experiment for this, baby. And I could imagine that when things are sort of happening out of your control, which they are, you can't control your labor, you can't control the way, your body's going, the baby's going, but also your environment now on top of that too. Very stressful. I would imagine that what you said, EMDR, EMT, all that kind of stuff, because it deals with such a physical thing, it would really help, I think, reset your body. The reason I think a lot of the times, like the tapping therapy, the EMDR, because when people, when I first started, I was a bit afraid to sort of start it, because I didn't really want to open Pandora's box, and that's sort of why I didn't want to do it. But what I noticed was that it started to sort of unravel a physical side of me that I repressed, and it was coming out in ways where, when I was working with a therapist, they would have me sort of follow their finger as I was explaining something. And I was sort of like, why are we doing this? I don't get it. But what's happening is you're moving part of your trauma over into the other side of your brain, and without you kind of knowing it. And it's almost like it's processing on a different wavelength, and it's helping you that way. And what I realized when I was doing it was I was having sort of experiences of like my body started to tense up or shake. And that, when I think back to the trauma that I had experienced, that was in the moment what I was doing. So it was almost like my body was trying to release this pent up feeling and emotion. Because again, like you said, you can also deal with therapists that don't understand birth trauma, or like the specific trauma that you're going through, because it's not always talking through it. Like, I find I could sort of talk about it, but nothing was making any difference for me until I sort of did the physical thing, because the physical thing is what I was holding inside of me. And that was, I think, the shaking, the tension, the teeth grinding, like the weird eye movements and things like that. And that's also part of being traumatized, is your body reacts in certain ways.
Absolutely, totally agree. And that's why some of the somatic approaches, such as somatic experiencing, TRE, EMDR, EFT, can be really, really, really helpful. So,
can you explain some of them? Just because I'm not sure, like, I know what EMDR is, but can you tell me sort of what the difference is in some of the therapies that people use?
I mean, they all kind of use similar approaches. So, so somatic experience is like quite obviously recalling the memory, but also moving your body as you're recalling it. So
right, okay.
I've never actually physically experienced somatic experiencing. I've just read a little bit about it. But Peter Levine is the person to look at YouTube. He's got loads of YouTube videos. So he's the person to look at in terms of somatic experiencing. But it's really, really, really powerful for trauma. I use EMDR. EMDR and EFT are very, very similar. So you bring into focus like the experiences that you have had, and you, with tapping, we tap on various parts of our head, face and body, and that helps the amygdala to regulate and become much calmer. And when that's calmer, then you can engage the rational brain, and it helps to file away the memory. And EMDR is very, very, very similar. They're both quite similar, and both quite have sort of similar efficacy in terms of, when they look at like for like, they both have similar-ish results. EFT is newer than EMDR, so it's still not got the same credibility behind it, but the studies that are out there are fairly promising. And the lovely thing about EFT is that you can learn to do that yourself, which is what I think is really good about EFT. Then there's TRE, which I have had experience. I've been a guinea pig to some of my friends. And I've been pregnant for EMDR as well. Some of my friends who've been training, so I've done EMDR as well. TRE is a bit like yoga. You don't necessarily recall the experiences, but it's about really sort of focusing on how the psoas muscle is holding on to all that tension related to the trauma that you experience. It's particularly good, I think, for complex PTSD.
Yeah.
It's particularly good for people who've experienced a lot of trauma. But again, that is showing really, really, really promising results in terms of trauma therapy. And I didn't actually remember to include my other favourite approach, which is internal family systems, which is starting to gain a really good reputation, and that is really good for trauma as well. Again, that is going back to those experiences and those times, and really think about what was it you needed, and really healing that in quite a different way. But again, it's really, really, really powerful. I think a lot of talking therapy doesn't always really get to the root of the issues. CBT is like seen to be the gold standard for trauma, but yet it's only 50% effective.
That's cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah. And it also puts like a lot of emphasis like on you, that you're doing something wrong because there's something wrong with your thinking and how you're approaching it, and you could be thinking about it in a completely different way, and it's all about changing your thinking. And I think that like I don't particularly always like, sometimes I think it's really helpful to change your thinking and change your outlook. But I think when you've experienced trauma, I think a lot of the time what you need is like that validation of those experiences and that processing bit by bit. So when you would have done EMDR, you'd have probably stepped through it in tiny, tiny, tiny bits as you were doing the EMDR. And EFT is like that as well, and it's really good for sequencing what's happened, so that the brain then knows this was the start point, this is what happened, and this is how it ended. Like this is like where it ended.
Right.
So really getting very clear on those bookends.
So it sounds like kind of a combination of all things together: cognitive behavioral therapy, so the talking aspect, and then also the physical aspect. Like I said, I experienced myself, because you can talk sometimes and never feel like you're getting anywhere. And that's where I think sometimes the EMT, the EMDR, the acupuncture, where it's got a bit of a change in your energy, will help you out. So I'm really thankful that you came on here today, Tricia. So how can some of our mums connect with you now?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the best place is Instagram. So it's at Tricia Murray UK. Although I'm UK based, I do work with mums internationally. So I do work with mums right across the world. So that's probably the best place. Or else my website, which is www.triciamurray.co.uk. And I've got a new download there specifically for mums who have experienced some perinatal trauma, in terms of a guide to recovery for perinatal trauma. So I'll send you the link so that you've got that.
So I'll put the link in the show notes here, because it looks like we have one called 7 Steps to Supporting Your Own Recovery from Trauma. And I think that would really help women sort of process and go through. So I'll leave your website link for mums to be able to download that and have a look. So it was a pleasure having you on today, and I'm thrilled for our mummy viewers to be able to use some of these tools. And it was really fascinating and listening to all the advice and everything that you have for us today. So thank you, Tricia. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Bethany. Thank you for having me. And I've really, really enjoyed today. Thank you.